Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're located today. Firstly, let me introduce myself. My name is Elliot Harper, and I'm a Senior Marketing Technology Architect here at CloudKettle. I've been working with Salesforce Marketing Cloud for almost a decade now. I've written books on Marketing Cloud, and I'm very active in the user community. And over the years, I've implemented many preference centers and preference management processes across many organizations. And Greg, perhaps you can explain your role at CloudKettle and your background.
Sure, thanks, Elliot. Hi, everyone. I'm Greg Bates, Director of Marketing Cloud here at CloudKettle. While I have not written any books on the topic, I have been working with Marketing Cloud for over 6 years, and I'm excited to share some tips with you guys today.
Great. Thanks, Greg. Now, before we begin, I want to explain this is a live webinar and we're really keen to answer your questions. But to help the session flow, we won't be pausing to accept questions during our presentation. Instead, you can post your questions to the Q&A panel, which is located in the Zoom tray of your application. And John McGinley, one of our partners here at CloudKettle, will review them and will answer them at the end of the session. In today's session, we'll be covering the following topics. And, as I just explained, we'll answer any questions at the end of our presentation. Well, let's begin. Firstly, what is a preference center and why do you need one? Well, in short, a preference center is a web page that enables your subscribers to decide what types of messages they want to receive. Preference centers aren't actually a legal requirement, but at a minimum, you need to provide the ability for subscribers to opt out or unsubscribe from marketing communication. And a simple one-click unsubscribe link in an email is also perfectly acceptable. However, preference centers help to ensure you lose fewer subscribers, as in the vast majority of cases, a subscriber will visit their preference center when they want to unsubscribe. But they may just prefer to receiving fewer messages or only messages about a specific topic. Providing subscribers with alternative options to unsubscribing will help to reduce your unsubscribe rate. But surprisingly, 60% of marketers don't give subscribers the option to select the types of emails they want to receive. And only 30% of marketers allow their subscribers to decide how often they want to be emailed. Additionally, you can use preference centers to enrich your customer profile, as these web pages provide another way where you can capture what types of products or services your customers are interested in. By letting customers choose what types of communication they want to receive, you can also use this data to include personalized and relevant offers and content in your marketing communication. I'll now hand over to Greg, who'll share some best practices and design elements that you should consider when creating a preference center.
Cool. Thanks, Elliot. So now we're going to dive in and take a look at some design best practices and hopefully give you guys some ideas that you can take away and implement in your own preference centers. And while we're going to run through quite a few ideas here, remember that we're not telling you that you need to implement all of them. It's really up to you to decide which of these approaches apply the most to your own business and try to keep things as simple as possible. So what's the big deal here? Why should we care so much about our preference centers? Well, it's easy to overlook, but your preference center is a really important part of the overall customer experience. As marketers, we obviously love to see our lists grow and our messages get out to as many people as possible. But the preference center is what makes your relationship with subscribers truly two-sided and allows them to dictate how serious the relationship gets. If we're coming on too strong, we really need to give them a way to let us know that so we can fix our approach and not drive that potential customer away completely. Which brings me to my next point. And that is the fact that a subscriber has landed on your preference center page is actually a pretty significant event in the customer lifecycle. It's a signal that something is off about the way that we're communicating with that individual. And it's an opportunity to not only stop them from unsubscribing, but completely change their whole experience with our brand. And it can really make the difference between a prospect unsubscribing out of frustration or unlocking the exact content and experience that they need from us to keep that relationship alive and sales potential on the table. Finally, a well-designed preference center can help you build more complete profiles of your subscribers. So by using surveys and progressive profiling within your emails and within the preference center itself, you can slowly learn more about your subscribers over time and hopefully make them feel like you understand what their needs are and trust that you'll use that information to send them only content that's really relevant to them. So let's take a look at some examples of options that we can include in our preference centers to create a better experience for our subscribers and for our users. One of the most important options that we can give subscribers is the option to control the frequency with which we're emailing them. So like Looker does here, we could include a snooze or pause option as an alternative to unsubscribing. So as a subscriber, I may still be interested in what you have to offer, but now just isn't really the right time. In this case, I might, maybe I have a genuine interest in the content that Looker sends me, but it's not going to be relevant to the projects I'm working on for a little while. So I decide instead of unsubscribing, and since they offered, I'll just take a break for now. It's kind of serving the same function as snoozing a message in Gmail that you're not ready to take action on, but want to be reminded of later. And so this keeps me subscribed, but it also signals at least a hint of intent and tells Looker that their content is important enough to me that I wasn't ready to unsubscribe completely. Once I'm out of my hibernation period after my snooze, Looker could then add me to something like a welcome back journey and ease me back into regular mailings and even do some progressive profiling to try and learn a little bit more about me so they can tailor their messaging better this time around. Also, notice that Looker is including the frequency of each type of email that they're sending here as well. This gives me a really clear idea of how much email I'm signing up for by opting into each type of communication and really lets me fine-tune my subscription. Maybe the weekly digest was a little bit too much for me, but I'm totally cool with getting important product announcements every other month. Another option is to offer what we call a fatigue rule for commercial emails. This lets your subscribers define a cap on the number of emails that you can send them in a given month. So in this example, Qatar Airways is just sending a general newsletter. So this type of fatigue rule works just fine. If they were to offer several different types of communications, all with different frequencies, just offering a cap on the number of emails a subscriber is receiving might not be the best approach. If we have newsletters, new route announcements, promotional offers, and other types of emails, it's going to become difficult to decide which ones we should send and which we should suppress a specific subscriber from. So in cases where you have multiple different types of communications, an approach like Looker's would probably provide a better user experience. But for simple weekly newsletter, this type of simple fatigue rule can really work just fine. In addition to offering a fatigue rule in your preference center, you can consider including that option on sign up as well. So again, as marketers, we're always really hungry to keep building our list and seeing those numbers grow. But by being a little more thoughtful in how we onboard a new subscriber, we can really make a difference in how that subscriber experiences our brand. So for an e-commerce brand, it's pretty standard to offer a discount when a subscriber joins our list. And at this point, I think we all fully expect to be bombarded with email in return for that discount. In this example, though, Milk Photo Books is they're offering that standard discount, but they're also giving us the option of only hearing from them once a month, or actually even opting out of marketing email completely once we've created our account. It's really subtle, but it signals a certain respect for the subscriber, and that's going to have an impact on how folks view your brand. So for many potential customers, this could very well be the difference that pushes them to make a purchase. So Keep this in mind and think about how you can show that same type of thoughtfulness to your own subscribers. In this preference center, a subscriber can set a blackout period. So again, the objective here is to provide the subscriber with an alternative option to unsubscribing altogether. So in this example, we're allowing the user to specify a date range to blackout. And this is essentially the same as a snooze option, but you could take this a little bit further and give subscribers the option to black out specific days of the week or even specific times during the day. So if this were some sort of consumer entertainment business, for example, as a subscriber, I might really look forward to that content, but I'd rather not receive it during work hours because it's more likely to get buried in my inbox. So if given the option, I might choose to only receive email from this company after, say, 5 p.m. when I know that I'll actually see it. Again, the options that you present are really going to depend on your business type and the type of email that you send. So next is email categories and channels. It's best practice to allow subscribers to choose which types or categories of emails they'd like to receive. And you may also want to consider including a description for each category. So explaining what a daily digest or product updates email actually contains to help subscribers make an informed decision. We can also include additional channels. So for example, SMS, push notifications, or inbox messages to mobile apps. Spotify does a really great job of this. And here you can see that I'm able to fine tune my experience. So I'm getting different types of content delivered through the specific channel that I'd like to consume it in. I like getting Spotify's news in an email, but I personally prefer new music and recommendations be pushed to me through the app. So I'm able to interact with them when I'm actually on my phone and more likely to be able to jump right into the app and listen to that music. In addition to including email category descriptions, you could also consider including a link to a sample email where subscribers could preview sample content of those emails. So to help them, again, make an informed decision when they're subscribing. This is particularly useful for companies who provide longer form content or curated digests in their emails, but it's a nice touch for any business offering multiple categories of email. And it's a pretty low calorie lift as well in order to actually implement something like this. And again, it's just a nice subtle touch that kind of shows the subscriber that we're being upfront and only want to send them content that they actually want to see from us. If you include more granular content in your email, for example, different types of offers, then include these options as subcontent types. This not only enables subscribers to receive more relevant emails, but it can also be used for progressive profiling and helps you gain insights into customer preferences. It's worth noting here too that if you're going to offer this level of granularity in your options, you really need to be rock solid on your content strategy and your approach to segmentation. We also need to make sure that we're not overwhelming our subscribers with options. So just make sure you're very thoughtful in how granular you actually want to get and don't go too overboard with options. So this is more of a user interface best practice, but you might want to consider swapping out your default form checkboxes with toggle-based controls. While form checkboxes provide a perfectly functional method for selecting preferences, animated toggle controls provide a little richer user experience, and it's one that we're all kind of accustomed to and expect at this point. So in addition to that, you may also want to think about submitting the form using client-side JavaScript as soon as an option is changed, rather than including a classic form submit button. And this way my preferences are saved as soon as I hit that toggle, and I get a little bit more of an app-like experience. So this email from booking.com, it actually includes an embedded preference form directly within the email. And you can achieve this today with interactive email inside of Salesforce Marketing Cloud. Embedded forms like this are a really great way to let people easily manage their preferences from within an email, but they're also really useful for progressive profiling and getting to know your subscribers. So for example, if we were only collecting an email address when a subscriber opts in, an embedded form in the automated welcome email that we send them could be a really great way to enrich that onboarding experience and allow that subscriber to tell us a little bit more about themselves, like their name, location, interests, that sort of thing. This will help us determine what information we should be sending them in the future, but it also reduces the risk that they'll ever end up on our Preference Center page looking to unsubscribe in the first place. So with some thoughtful design, embedded forms like this can be a really great way to identify your most engaged and likely to buy subscribers. So a few important legal inclusions to think about in your preference centers. And firstly, let me say that this is by no means legal advice. And in fact, rule number 1 of consent management is to always consult a legal professional to make sure that you remain compliant. But with that said, it's important to explain to subscribers that they'll continue to receive transactional communications even after unsubscribing. So examples of transactional emails are things like password resets and billing related emails, really any non-commercial messages along these lines that are usually triggered by a user action. Additionally, you may be required to give subscribers the option to opt out of email tracking or even exercise their right to be forgotten in order to comply with privacy regulations in your subscriber's country. You should again, of course, consult a legal advisor to confirm whether this applies in your specific case. In some scenarios, subscribers may continue to receive email marketing communications from you even after unsubscribing. For example, if you're using more than one marketing platform and you need to synchronize unsubscribe requests across these platforms. So in these scenarios, you should let subscribers know how long unsubscribe requests take to process and ensure that that time frame aligns with any applicable privacy regulations. So in addition to the best practices that I've shared, here are a few additional considerations to keep in mind when designing your preference center. First, give subscribers a way to update their email address. An easy way to do this is by simply pre-populating a form field with their email address, which they can then update when the preference center loads. And if you choose not to allow the subscriber to update their email, then at a minimum, you should really include their email address on the page somewhere for easy identification and validation, just to give them confirmation that we've got the right person. Next, avoid the temptation of creating a long form page with lots of options. Aim to keep all of the content on a single page above the fold by keeping your copy and options short and concise. And remember, just because you can include all of these different ideas and options in your preference centers, it doesn't mean that you should. So decide what makes sense for your business and implement the simplest solution that you can. Also, avoid using links that take subscribers away from your preference center to a different page. So an example of this might be to view your terms and conditions. Instead, include that additional content in something like a collapsible section or a scrolling text box to reduce the bounce rate on your page. If you're sending multilingual emails, then you really need to make sure that you have a multilingual preference center. Might seem obvious, but so many companies overlook this. And finally, it's important that your preference center meets privacy regulations. For example, including a do not track option in certain European jurisdictions. And again, presumably you are not a lawyer, so you're most definitely going to need a legal review for compliance inclusions. Okay, let's finally discuss a couple of considerations for creating links from your marketing communications to a preference center. So when you're linking to a preference center from an email, ensure that any personally identifiable information or PII data is not included in the URL to the preference center. If a subscriber clicks on a link from a public computer, then this is going to be visible in their web browser history, and we don't want other people having the ability to access that. So if you're using Salesforce Marketing Cloud and you've created a landing page in Cloud Pages for your preference center, you're going to want to use the Cloud Pages URL AmpScript function. And this is going to include that subscriber data in an encrypted query string and really protect you from anybody being able to access that information. Secondly, when sending SMS messages, you should consider including a preference center link in your message instead of an opt-out keyword for the same reasons that I discussed earlier. You do need to be aware, however, of the 160 character limitation in SMS messages. And while messages can be concatenated to sort of appear as a single message, you really should shorten your links using a URL shortener service like Bitly or Rebrandly, just to avoid being charged for unnecessary extra messages. So with that, I'm going to hand things back over to Elliot to discuss best practices for list and data management.
Thanks, Greg. Let me start by discussing different approaches for managing subscriber lists and subscription status. Now, all email marketing platforms offer a list management feature, which you can use to manage subscriber preferences. Now, I'm aware that many of you are using Salesforce Marketing Cloud, and I just want to spend a few minutes sharing some considerations for using this platform for preference management. Firstly, Marketing Cloud provides several different options for managing the types of emails that subscribers opt in to receive, the first being subscriber lists. For the majority of use cases, I'd avoid using subscriber lists in Marketing Cloud. While this list model provides a convenient method for audience segmentation, these lists can't be shared across business units. Additionally, Salesforce advised against using lists to store a large number of subscribers, specifically greater than 500,000 records. Instead, I'd encourage you to use publication lists. Publication lists in Marketing Cloud help you manage how subscribers receive different categories of emails or SMS messages. For example, when you send an email newsletter, you can associate that send with a corresponding publication list to identify the type of content in the email. And when you do this, the subscribers in your sendable data extension will be appended to the list if they don't already exist in it. These lists can be configured to be publicly available in the default subscription center. Or, if you created a custom preference center, you can retrieve the available publication lists, their descriptions, and a subscriber's subscription status using server-side JavaScript or AmpScript API functions. And when a subscriber opts out from a publication list, then their subscription status is updated against that corresponding list. Now, many Marketing Cloud customers choose to use data extensions for list management, which, while they provide a convenient storage method, they're not really designed for this purpose. That is, they're schema dependent, and adding additional email category types may require schema changes and updates to your server-side code. Additionally, if a subscriber opts out of a specific communication type, then you'll need to build complex automations to add these records to an exclusion list or an auto-suppression list at send time, and maintain the automation if the data extension schema changes. Instead, I recommend using publication lists, as they're specifically designed to overcome this paradigm and, when implemented correctly, shouldn't require additional code changes when your lists change. Also, when a subscriber unsubscribes from an email, it's important that you unsubscribe the subscriber correctly from the platform, which you can do using the log unsub event SOAP API execute call in your custom preference center. This approach has several advantages over alternative methods, for example, using the server-side JavaScript unsubscribe call function, as the log unsub event attributes the unsubscribe event back to the email. So Marketing Cloud users can see who unsubscribed from a specific email. And if you're sending to a lead or contact in Salesforce, then it will also update the has opted out of email field on the lead or contact record. Now, I've seen some Marketing Cloud customers choose not to use the status field on the subscriber record to manage unsubscribes, and instead store subscription status elsewhere, like in data extensions. But this is a very dangerous practice. You should always use the subscriber status to manage unsubscribe events, to ensure that emails are not accidentally sent to unsubscribed subscribers. Additionally, when building a custom preference center, regardless of the marketing platform you're using, it's important to build in exception handling and reporting. For example, to accommodate for scenarios where an unsubscribe event fails. I live in Australia, and just this year we've seen two high-profile cases where organizations were issued heavy fines as they didn't have exception handling processes in place. Optus, an Australian telecommunications company, was fined over $500,000 Australian dollars earlier this year for sending customers emails and SMS messages after customers had unsubscribed. And also, Woolworths, a large supermarket chain in Australia, was fined over $1 million Australian dollars this year for a similar incident. These cases aren't unique to Australia and typically occur when custom preference centers are used without any systems in place for handling failed unsubscribe events. Finally, I want to discuss some important compliance considerations for capturing and storing preference data. And this starts with managing preference data across different platforms in your marketing technology stack. For example, you might be using more than one marketing platform, like Salesforce Marketing Cloud and Pardot, or you might be replatforming to Marketing Cloud and need to keep sending from your previous platform during the transition and IP warm-up phase. In these types of scenarios, you need to ensure that any unsubscribe and resubscribe requests are kept in synchronization across platforms. The approaches to achieving this vary by platform, but all marketing platforms provide the ability to export and import subscriber data. Secondly, there is an emerging trend towards consent management, which has largely been driven by current and emerging data protection regulations, which require organizations to establish a legal basis for processing consent data. I'm sure you've all interacted with this type of consent before, clicking that opt-in checkbox when providing your email address on a web form, or clicking through distracting accept buttons on website pop-ups. Now, consent management and preference management serve different purposes. Consent management determines which individuals provided consent, why they did, via which channel, and what they actually consented to. On the other hand, preference management enables individuals to choose their preferred communication frequency, interests, and alternative options to unsubscribing. And I want to mention this, as if you're not yet using a consent management platform, then you may need to ensure that you're capturing related privacy data on your preference center for regulatory compliance purposes. At a minimum, you'll need to maintain a persistent audit trail that captures when an individual opted in and out of receiving marketing communications. Well, thank you for attending the session today. Now, we've covered a lot of ground, but we hope that you now have a better understanding of best practices and considerations when designing and implementing preference centers. We now have plenty of time for questions, and I see there are already some great questions in the Q&A panel, so I'm going to pass over to my colleague John McGinley for moderation.
Thanks very much, Elliot. Again, you, Greg, another terrific job. Thank you so much. We have a smaller group tonight than we did earlier today, and a few folks I think might be a little bit shy. So We do have a few questions, but we've got lots of time. And if any of you out there watching do have questions, please, you have these two gentlemen who would be more than happy to answer some of the questions that you may throw our way. But to kick things off, we did have a couple of ones that I'd like to throw pretty quick, and I think might be easy one for you, Elliot. The do not track, how do you enable that in Salesforce Marketing Cloud?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's quite simple, actually. You just need to go and create a custom profile attribute in Email Studio with the name do not track, all one word. And that will either accept a value of yes or no. If it's yes, then the subscriber won't be tracked. And just a remark on this feature and how it works is that, or something to bear in mind, is it won't report on any email sends or opens or clicks. So if an email has been sent to, like, say, 10 subscribers and you have all 10 open the email, then in reporting it's going to show you that you only have a 50% open rate. So it will kind of skew the statistics, that's kind of by design. So, if this is important to you, then you may need to go and create a query and a custom report to look at the enterprise attribute data view to identify out of that given send which subscribers actually have that do not track attribute enabled.
Perfect. Thank you. Greg, one for you that came in that I think you and I have talked about in the past, but you talked on the examples that you gave, there's a couple of different throttles and blackout periods. So kind of a two-part question there. Can you have a throttle on the period of time, whether it be like a month or 2 months or 3 months, and how do you set that? And then secondly, the follow-up question that was asked is, can you have the do not contact for two ranges of time? So an example, like 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. and then I don't want you to contact me between noon and 5 p.m. or something like that.
Right. So yeah, short answer is you definitely can have multiple blackout periods or timeframes, but you need to keep in mind that this is not out of the box functionality. So you're going to have to build that, and you're also going to have to build out the logic behind it. So the more options that you're adding, the more sort of technical debt you're taking on. So you need to be really thoughtful about just the way that you design that, and make sure that you have the correct business logic in place. I mean, the easiest way to implement something like that would really be that sort of first scenario that you mentioned, where maybe you're offering 3 set timeframes. So you snooze me for 1 month, 2 months, or 3 months. And then in terms of multiple sort of blackout hours, I would definitely just stick to one. It's just going to be a headache to maintain. Anything to add there, Elliot?
I think the shyness is starting to wear off. We've got a couple of people throwing some questions up in the room here now. One that just came in. What are the best ways to sync preference attribute data from Marketing Cloud to Salesforce?
Yeah, I can go and take that one. It's a great question. So typically the best approach, I would say, is to use the update single Salesforce object AMScript function in Marketing Cloud. So that is when a subscriber updates their preferences on their preference page, then you go and use that AMScript API function, AMScript function to update the corresponding lead or contact record in Sales Cloud. And this is a practice that I and many people follow. If you want to go and see some example code, it's a shameless plug for my book, The AMScript Guide, Your Comprehensive Scripting Reference Manual for Salesforce Marketing Cloud. But you can head over to AMScript.guide and see an example of that. But yeah, that's definitely the way to do it.
Perfect. All right. either one of you can answer this one, but Dan would like to know what the best way to configure and display both SMS and email preferences in one customer preference center in Marketing Cloud.
Do you want to take a stab at that, Elliot?
Sure, yeah. So look, it depends on kind of how you're using it. And this is, again, another reason I advocate the use of publication lists, because publication lists work for both email and SMS messages. It's a little bit of extra work to go and retrieve the publication list names and their descriptions and identify which publication list that subscriber is currently subscribed to or on. But all of this is achievable using WS Proxy and with server-side JavaScript. And I think you'll actually find several examples of this on Salesforce Stack Exchange. That would be my advice. So look at publication lists.
Following on that, Katrina has asked, if you are using list management that is not a publication list, for example, data extensions, what would be the process of switching to publication lists?
Yeah, it's actually quite straightforward. Publication lists under the hood are just data extensions. They don't look like data extensions, at least from a user interface perspective, but they behave in exactly the same way. That is, you can go and query them in the same way and use AmScript lookup functions. I guess so there are two methods. There's the simpler, more declarative way, and a little bit more complex, but certainly cooler way. The first would be to go and write a query. In fact, you run a data extract activity to extract those records from that data extension, and perhaps normalize it to the schema of the publication list, which from memory, I think it's you've got subscriber key and status, I think. And then, probably using conjunction with a query, data extract to the safe house, and then a file transfer across to your Marketing Cloud SFTP account. And then you can do an import activity. And on the import activity, there's an option to import to a publication list. The much more cooler way is you can do this all in one query activity. And that's because, as I said, that no, in fact, you can do it all in a script activity. And that's because I said that these. No, let me take a step back. You can do it in a query activity, but the way that you need to do this query activity is that obviously you can't just go and use the name of the publication list. You have to go and create some kind of placeholder query, and then you have to go and use the Marketing Cloud SOAP API to go and obtain the external key of that publication list. But once you have that, you can then go and use a script activity, or maybe using the Marketing Cloud API to go and update the query activity and put the external key in it. Ultimately, what you end up with is a query activity that targets or updates that publication list directly, without having this kind of long linear flow of running a data extract activity to the safe house, then a file transfer and an import activity is just a much more kind of a seamless kind of having one query. And I'm pretty sure there are some examples of how to achieve this on Salesforce Stack Exchange. I mean, there are only over 6,000 questions on Salesforce Stack Exchange. If you have a question on Salesforce Marketing Cloud, I can guarantee the answer's there. And if it's not, let me know and I'll answer it for you. So
that's very kind of you. So there's a question here that it's actually two questions that I'm going to try to blend into one, and I think based on one of the questions earlier today, it's in a similar vein. They're talking about syncing the preferences from Marketing Cloud to Salesforce, and if they need to make those preference attribute updates in a custom object. And I think they may be referring to the consent management object, and we talked about that briefly.
No, I mean, I think they are talking about a custom object. Consent management is these are standard objects, but a custom object just behaves like any standard S object. So again, I'd use the update single Salesforce object AMScript function or the create Salesforce object function to go and create or update records in that in the custom object. So using those functions, two things. A, don't count towards your API usage limit, even though they do use the Force.com API under the hood. Secondly, you can update any standard or custom object, but not other object types like external app objects or kind of platform objects. But yeah, that's definitely the way to go. Again, shameless plug, AMScript.guy. Go and check out. There's a example code for that kind of exact specific scenario. Okay, hopefully that helps.
All right, got a couple more here, and folks, if you do have other questions, we do have a little bit of time here, so I'm gonna probably there's two here. I'm gonna knock them down in reverse order for now. One of the questions is, are there any app exchange options that you prefer for building Preference Center in Salesforce, which you can then access using AMScript?
So there is a ISV partner who's built a custom Preference Center and highly customizable as well. So if you're looking for a kind of a more declarative approach rather than writing code, I encourage you to go and check it out. It's from Horizontal Digital, I think. Certainly there's at least one.
Okay, perfect. So this is a rather long one. I can do my best to read it, and if you need me to go back, let me know. But if all of your Marketing Cloud contacts come from Salesforce, choose to store Preference Center options and would build a cloud page with AMScript, which gets Salesforce data and populates already chosen Preference Center options directly from Salesforce, and then posts it back to Salesforce on save. This means that if the contact calls the call center, the business can update these preferences in Salesforce directly without having to engage marketers. What do you think of this as a possible solution?
Yeah, and look, this is quite a common pattern that I see. There are two approaches. So you can either use the retrieve Salesforce objects function to go and retrieve a row set of any records from a standard or custom object, and it works quite well. It's not that performant. It takes like a couple of seconds, but in the context of web pages loading, it's neither here nor there. But please never use that function within an email, at least for a batch send. As I remember, I'll kind of tell a war story that I had a client calling saying, "Oh, we're retrieving records using the retrieve Salesforce objects AMScript function, and it's sent 337 emails so far, and we've calculated it will take another 1.5 years for the email to finish sending." So like I said, it's just very slow, but it's certainly best suited or in fact reserved for use in preference centers. The other and more performant approach would be to use a synchronized data extension to go and using the AMScript lookup rows function to go and retrieve those records from the synchronized object. I guess a consideration with that, however, is that's in kind of near time. So that means that if the contact, so someone in the contact center has gone and made a change, it can take up to 15 minutes for that change to be reflected in the preference center, and that you might end up with a data integrity issue. So probably using retrieve Salesforce AMScript function is definitely a more safer option. And again, you'll find an example of the code to achieve for that specific use case in the AMScript guide. So check it out.
Perfect, thank you, Greg. This one's for you. I'm gonna get you to put on your Marketing Cloud consultant hat here for a second. But have a question around examples when you have worked with clients and they're pushing back on Preference Center and they want to keep it whole. What advice or how would you suggest folks in this call and others position that back to them, that the benefit of the Preference Center far outweighs the ability to keep things whole?
So yeah, I mean, when we're talking about some of these design best practices, it's pretty common for a client to just sort of view it as a technical sort of nice to have addition. And we know as consultants that it's going to drive results for them, but sometimes you just have to reframe it and sort of speak in the client's language. So I generally like to try to roll everything up to revenue or whatever metrics they're trying to hit, and I'll choose just a really small experiment that we can run and say, look, if I think that putting this element in place is going to help us reduce churn by X%, right? Let's implement that and give it a shot, right? And in that way, you can warm them up in sort of like small bite-sized experiments and sort of work your way up to a more full-fledged preference center.
And just to expand on this, and I think it's important to note that, yes, of course, there are other options. There's a default profile center and subscription center. And yet, that hasn't changed since ExactTarget's inception 20 years ago. And I'm really still a bit confused why that hasn't been a priority for Salesforce. Specifically today, if you were to go and view that default profile center, as many subscribers would on their mobile device, it appears as this postage stamp. I mean, it's not even mobile optimized. It's very awkward to use. So it's kind of bizarre that they haven't gone and addressed this sooner. I would actually love to not build custom preference centers. I think that this should be built in core, and I think that Salesforce should very seriously consider perhaps having a set of, say, cloud page templates where you've got these preference centers that are ready to go, and customers that can then go maybe apply their install sheet or kind of tweak it as they may. Kind of a bit of a history lesson. So the default profile center used to be actually very highly customized. It uses classic ASP pages on the back end, and they at that time would use kind of a third-party system integrator to customize this through kind of professional services, but that service is no longer offered, which is a great shame because architecturally is actually well considered, although it uses kind of classic ASP, which is a web application framework really not in use today. So I've already given this feedback kind of numerous times to product management, and I do hope that they address this soon. Probably one of the first things they need to do, however, is introduce support for templates in Cloud Pages. And it's kind of surprising that that's not there today. I mean, as Cloud Pages, at least the new interface uses Content Builder. And just like that we have with emails where we can go and create templates for emails, I'd love to see a similar experience for Cloud Pages where I can drag and drop content blocks into predefined content areas. But I think once they do that, then maybe they could even offer kind of a set of default preference centers that maybe have some of the kind of design elements and do kind of client-side AJAX calls and integrate with Sales and Service Cloud using those AppScript functions I mentioned.
Perfect, thank you. So last question, and then I think we're going to probably bring this in for a landing. But one of the questions that was asked earlier today, and I think was very important, is, and Elliot, I'll direct this one to you. It's the umbrella brand versus the individual business units. Any advice on how you would handle those? Individual preference center for sub brands versus the umbrella of a parent company?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So I guess it depends on the nature of those business units. Actually, there used to be a requirement to go and have that create separate cloud pages, if indeed you're using cloud pages for preference centers in each child business unit. That's no longer the case, and I validated this. You can, in fact, maintain a single like cloud page landing page in the parent business unit and have each of the using the cloud pages URL AMScript function that Greg mentioned earlier. You can reference that page ID in that first argument passed to the function. So you can kind of certainly manage that way. Or, if you, maybe the types of options differ, or kind of the branding differs, then you may want to use individual landing pages, but perhaps maybe have some common elements that appears across all preference centers kind of in those cloud pages. So you could use shared content blocks to achieve that, maybe as a consistent header or footer. But yeah, so you've got a lot of flexibility and options there. Either create individual ones at a business unit level, or even kind of roll up to an enterprise level. Just one side note, however, I did observe that the member ID personalization string, which returns the MID of the business unit, and when you go and use that in Cloud Pages, it actually returns the MID that the Cloud Page is published on, and not the context of the member ID used to go and send the email. That is just for the uninitiated. If you can include system data personalization strings like email ADDR, underscore subscriber key, list ID, job ID, email ID, just as personalization strings in your AMScript block. And if you're using the Cloud Pages URL AMScript function, there's nothing more you need to do. It's able to go and get those values based on the context of the send. The only kind of caveat is member ID. So if you are using have a preference center in the parent business unit, simply pass that member ID as an additional argument in your Cloud Pages URL AMScript function, so it can be retrieved from the parent business unit.
Great. There was a follow-up question that says, does that mean if you're sending an email from a child business unit, you can use a preference center cloud page located in the parent business
That's
unit?
exactly what I mean. And I don't believe that didn't used to be the case, but I certainly validated that it's certainly achievable now. Obviously, when you go and initiate that log unsub event using WS proxy, probably is the easiest way to do it. You can go and get those system data personalization strings, and the only thing that you can't get is the MID, which you probably really need because you want to go and execute that log unsub event call in the context of the MID where the email was sent from. So you can impersonate a client ID or MID using WS proxy, but the tricky thing is actually getting that value in the first place, and you're not going to be able to get it from the job ID. So while the job ID actually has the job data view. So while the job data view has an account ID, job data views are actually stored at a business unit level. So yeah, you probably want to just go and include that as an additional URL parameter. So.
Perfect, and we are almost at time, gentlemen. So there are no more questions in the queue. I am going to give you each a chance for a final word. Greg, I'll start with you. I thank you very much for your input and all you've done here. Any final thoughts for the folks that are still on the call?
No, just take all of this back and really again be thoughtful with what you decide to implement. The more you layer on top of your preference center, the more difficult it can become to maintain. So just put a lot of thought into how you're designing this. And if you have any questions, let us know, and we'll be happy to help.
Excellent. Thank you. So Elliot, last word to you, my friend. Another great webinar. Any final thoughts?
Thank you. So I mean, this is, I think, the sixth webinar. I'm beginning to lose count that we've run in the past 6 months. And you can catch up by heading over to youtube.com/cloudkettle and subscribe to view keep updated of upcoming webinars, but also view all our past webinars. We've got some other great Marketing Cloud content on there, so go and check it out from Marketing Cloud Minutes. Head over to cloudkettle.com and sign up for our newsletter to keep up to date. We've got a really great webinar coming up probably the end of next month, and I don't want to kind of steal my thunder, but about a new exciting feature that's going to come out shortly after the next release in Marketing Cloud, so watch out for that.
Excellent. I was wondering if you were going to tease them on that one or not. So yeah, there is another very exciting webinar coming up. Let's call it in late January. So with that, my final word is going to be thanks to all for who are still on the call and those who have registered. The replay of this will be going out on Monday, December 14th, for all those who have registered. And like I said, gentlemen, thank you very much. Very, very useful information, informative, entertaining as always. And with that, I think we will call it a night. Thanks, everyone.